Hello. Today we're going to be ranking ground types because ground is the second best type in the game behind steel. Sorry, fairy. And I think ground types are very important. This is a Gen 9 NetDex context again, like the steel type video was. And yeah, I think we should just hop right into it. Just going over everybody. I made sure triple checked Tinglu is the final ground type in the Pokedex. Hopefully. I'm not missing anybody. So that's good. So yeah, let's just start. The first one up. Okay, actually, I should probably explain the tiers first. We got the goat, the best singular best ground type. Whether it's like extremely good as a balancing an offensive or defensive role, or it's the best at what it does specifically, which is what S is, but it does that like better than the other S tiers. I just explained S. You can have a really, really good defensive steel type that's elite versus one that's just like really solid, like an A, and it will be up here. It doesn't just have to be a role balance. It could be like an extremely good offensive ground type as well, and it would go up in this S tier. A, they're very close to elite. In certain contexts, there's like offensive ground types that you won't draft as your solo ground type. Potentially. I mean, I think most ground types can probably just be drafted solo. But like if it's one that, potentially if one comes up on the list that's like up here and is offensive and should be drafted with another ground type, that would be a consideration for why it wouldn't be S, even if it's elite as an offensive ground. This is for like the middle of the list ones, like not considering the fact that they might have like really good value. Like I had Aggron up in A in the steel type video because I think it was like really, really good value. Or I think it's really, really good value for what it is. Like it's an 11-point Pokemon most of the time, but I think it's like a 15-point Pokemon just on paper. So that is something to consider. C are like the low mid, like they're the budget options kind of, but I like the term low mid tier better because it means that they've got a little bit more viability than you might think. Um, if you want a second ground type, then it's good to get it as a ground type. Like, say you double up on types, like if you pick treads like round 2 or whatever, and you want to double up on the ground instead of doubling up on the steel because its partner, like its top 2 partner, is just something that benefits more from having a secondary ground type on your team, like a Palafin, for example, then the C tiers are definitely, good candidates to look at. D is like the ones that you can pick. I guess they're like usable. They have like niches, but very concerning if it's like your only ground on your team. The C tiers can definitely work as solo ground types. It's just you definitely want to go for at least a B, but mostly the A tiers, I think, to S's. I think a ground type is something you really shouldn't skimp out on at all. And then any like, relatively decent, I mean like draftable NFEs that like people choose and are real will go here, but they're also not real, they're fake because you shouldn't spend 1 point on a ground type or 2 points. All right. All right, so first up we have Marowak, which is possibly made of dog meat. I don't think this Pokemon is draftable ever. After Gen 3, maybe Gen 4, I guess. It's just so like frail, and it's got like 40 speed, and yeah, Thick Club is like really strong. And you can get a Trick Room, and it's like cool, but you can like get a Caparaja, or you could get like a fucking, I don't know, an Iron Hands. You could get something that's like good in Trick Room or Saluna, like just like a real Trick Room abuser that isn't like a 1 point Marowak. The only reason I could ever see this being chosen is because you want a Stealth Rocker for 1 point, and that's it. Rhydon is a good low mid. I think like the 2 times 4 weaknesses kind of suck, but like, and you're kind of knockoff bait with a Violate. That being said, the stat spread is like really balanced. It's really strong and really fat, especially with a Violate in play, to the point where you don't really need to invest in Fizdef. And if you go like max Spadef, you can take like ludicrous hits. Like you can invest like personal experience. You can invest max Spadef in Rhydon and take a slow bro scald, and it's fucking weird and crazy. And I don't know what you would do back. I think I toxiced it in the game, which is like such a waste of my Pokemon. But you can do that if you really want to. Or you could like toxic it on the switch and then protect and then live and then Mega Hornet. And then it'll just teleport and then heal off most of the Mega Horn damage, but still, you know, it's something that it can do. Quagsire. I don't like Quagsire, but I have to acknowledge that it is actually a mid tier because of the hazards that they gave it and the fact that Unaware is just like a really it's just a good ability to potentially have on a lot of team styles. Like I think if you run an HO team, like if you draft Hyper Offense, Quagsire is actually a pretty decent choice for a hazard stacker because it also can just kind of ignore, counter setup options. You don't really want like a hazard setter that's passive, like a rocker, like just for simplicity's sake, like something further down the line, like a Dawn fan that functions pretty well on HO because it's got sturdy and a high attack stat. Quagsire functions for the exact opposite reason. It's not strong, but Unaware lets it just kind of recover in the face of like DD guys, and you have to be max Spadef, but it can kind of check like Calm Mind guys. As an Unaware poke, it like just barely has enough stats to where if you fully invest one way, then you can check that particular sort of setup threat. So I think it functions good on like HO builds and obviously stall. I think I think it can solo as a ground type, but it's like barely able to do it. Like I'm talking like just barely. Running calcs with it in like matchups where I see it, it's like enough to where I would run like grass moves on like a Genesect to kill it. Just like that much, that much consideration given. Except we have Gligar. I actually really like Gligar in that dex with Roost back. The additional hazards are just such a nice addition to its toolkit that Gligar just, again, like being able to function solo is like kind of a hard requisite to meet. So I do think it probably is a low mid, but yeah, I don't think Gligar is a solo type of ground type. I think it can work, but it's kind of hard to. But like I said, it's like a better hazard setter than Quagsire, but Quagsire fits more team styles than Gligar. And obviously being knockoff bait, again, kind of sucks. And then you have a quad weakness to a more common offensive type than Quag. So I think just for those reasons alone, it's a little worse. And it's a little more passive too. It doesn't have like Yawn or whatever. But that being said, obviously, Baby Gliscor, like it's just so solid defensively in that dex with Roost back, and you can pivot around, and it's a toxic switch in, which is like really rare to see on something that's not a steel or a poison. Immunity is such a nice thing for it, and Double Dance is pretty solid too. If you really have like your opponent is cripplingly ground weak, you can just run a Double Dance fucking Gligar and get away with it. It also has Knock, which is really good. That's like a good point for it. I think it's the only real Pokemon so far that has knockoff. Next up, we have Megalix. Megalix is a very good budget ground type. I'm going to actually put it, I think it can solo as a ground for sure. I don't think it should be the only... Actually, Mega Steel... Well, I don't think it should be the only steel and ground. I think it should be, like, the second one of either type. Like, you get, like, a Lando Eye, grab this, and then it's like a good steel type that functions well, and then it's just another ground type to have, and some pressure gets relieved defensively off Landorus. That sort of thing. It's very strong, hits pretty hard. If you have a sand team, then it gets even better, just as a mon, because it's like, I think it has 105 attack. I'm not going to double check. I lied, I am. Steelix Mega 125. Wow, that's actually pretty high. Yeah, it's just a pretty solid mon. Plus, Body Press is cool. This mon is really strong. Next up, we have Steelix, which I think is fine as a secondary ground. As a solo ground, it's kind of harder to do than its uncle. Mega Steelix because it's like way less bulky, but being able to run an item definitely makes a difference. But I think it is probably worse than Quag in that aspect. Damn, this is a rough start for ground types. Jesus. But yeah, this thing is like very solid as a low mid. I think power creep is definitely a factor, but it is a very solid physical check, and it's a good rocker. It's good at both being a decent steel and a decent ground type. It just lacks a lot in the special bulk department, to where it can't really switch in long term. Plus, no reliable recovery kind of sucks for that. Next up, we have Piloswine. Oh, God, man, I feel so bad for ground types. If this was Gen 7, Piloswine would be like A tier. I think I'm just kidding, but it's pretty decent in those sorts of gens. I think I'm gonna say that it is a low mid, probably worse than Steelix, because again, just Eviolite is kind of a hindrance to some of these guys. Less so Pylo, because it's actually Thick Fat is definitely a nice tool. It gives it kind of an ice resist, and like it makes fire a lot less of an issue. So if you do get knocked, you can still kind of take on like more things than Gligar or Rhydon can. So definitely better than those two. As a secondary ground type, I think it's good. Like if you draft a Zygarde, if you draft one that doesn't have rocks, then you grab your Piloswine down there. It's like it's just a good choice. And then the priority's really nice. It's still pretty strong relatively. It's like got good enough attack to where if you invest it strongly pressures a lot of the new adds to NatDex, and yeah, in a power creep generation, it still functions pretty well as a ground type. Can blocking Volt Switch, being a good defensive bond. It's a decent physical check, even though it's an ice type. I'm still a big Pylo guy. I like it. I think it's pretty draftable. All right, now we have Donphan. I hate Donphan. I fucking hate this Pokemon, but it is definitely the best mid tier so far. It is a pretty solid spinner. Ice Shard is nice for it, but this is 2-turn Tony. This guy literally gets up rocks and spins and dies. It can force, uncomfortable switches if you position it pretty well and you offensively invest into it. But because, it often just gets drafted as a solo ground type, this thing's role is to just die. Like, it's to just spin and then stick around for like 2 turns at most, usually, on average, of course. I think it's like fine at that, but it's very underwhelming as just a solo ground type. So, yeah. Knock is also good, but it's more utility, but it is pretty strong. So I think I kind of have to give it respect in that aspect. Next up, we have Mega Swampert. Obviously, literally just a rain sweeper, but it's like the best one. It's a pretty decent Mega. I think outside of rain, it's actually really good now that it has knockoff. And then like flip turn is still pretty good. It's literally just like, I think it is worse than Swampert at that. But if you're drafting it outside of rain, you're weird. But it can work like that, I guess, if you really want to try it. That being said, it's literally just rain and that's it. But it's very good on rain, so it's like very close to being like elite because of how great it is, on that archetype, despite being dedicated to the archetype. I don't know why this is out of order. I don't know why Swampert is in the middle of the Gen 1 ground types. Like, I just noticed Nidoqueen and Sandslash are like after it, but whatever. I think Swampert is extremely good. I'm not gonna lie. For the value that it is on lists, and just how good it is at getting up rocks and flip turning out, and just how good of a physical check it is, I want to say it's like a solid high tier considering the value. I think objectively, just because of the criteria of the list, I have to put it as a mid tier. But I am such a big Swampert guy. Like, I think this mon is incredible. Usually around the 11 or 12 point mark. I've drafted it at 13. I would probably draft it at 14. Really, it's just a really solid pivot. It has a good resist profile and only one weakness. Water Ground is a really good type. Like, we already talked about Quagsire and how that typing definitely helps it out. Knock is such a good tool for Swampert. It phases really well. offensive sets I think are pretty underexplored. As a guy who has never brought an offensive Swampert to a game outside of one ORAS game, but I think it's just like probably the best mid tier. I don't see any other mid tier ground type going above it besides maybe a Nido, and that's it. So next up we have Sandslash. This is the epitome of the D tier. I really want to put it down in F, but because it got spikes, I can't. This mon is fucking horrible, but it's draftable. Like if it's 2 points, 1 point, grab it because it gets spikes. It can spin like once every 26 games, and it can set rocks. Super Fang is a nice tool, and then like knock off, so it has just enough utility to be fine. And if you get it for like 1 point as a sand rush abuser, it can do damage. It has like an attack stat, and it can run choice band. So even though it gets outsped by like Scarf and Fernape, it can still do enough damage. That's where your opponent has to like kind of consider it as a potential Pokemon. Next up we have Nidoqueen, and I really like Nidoqueen. I actually think it's like a solid high tier. 14 to 15 points I think is a justifiable price to pay for a Nidoqueen. More often than not. I know that it is definitely power crept, but that being said, it still compresses pretty well, and it's just fat enough to where, it can still dish out some damage and stuff. I still think it's really good. So I'm a big Nidoqueen stan. Not as much as Nidoking anymore. I do definitively think Nidoking is better. But I used to think, like, back when Usum was, like, the main gen, that Nidoking was, like, a lot worse than Nidoqueen. Like, I thought it was, like, a considerable gap between the two. Now I realize that that's pretty wrong. They're pretty much, like, equal in my mind in Usum. But, like, after that, Nidoking definitely becomes better because of the strength. And, you can LARP a Nidoking as a Nidoqueen very well. So I'm actually going to put it above Megapert because Megapert is a one-trick. Nidoking just... its profile is so solid that I think just it functions extremely well in that dex as an offensive breaker. And it can just like come in and take hits. Like it forces like the high tier electrics in uncomfortable positions, stuff like your Zapdos, Cocos, and Zapdos, Cocos, and Zeraoras in horrible positions much more effectively than Nidoqueen does. Nidoqueen can still do it, but it's like so much easier to switch into a Nidoqueen than a Nidoking. So, plus it's a much better Scarfer. It just does a lot of things better. Nidoqueen lays down rocks and T-spikes and delivers Super Fangs a lot better than Nidoking does, but Nidoking is just a superior Pokemon in a lot of ways. Next up we have Mega Camerupt. I actually don't think Mega Camerupt is like abysmal. I think it's like a low mid for sure. I don't think it's better than you, but I do think it's better than Rhydon. It's just very hard to switch into, and it functions extremely well on Trick Room teams. Really not much more to say than that, to be honest. Literally just functions as a breaker, and it can be a decent breaker. It's just, I think megas are... it's just better to pick a good mega than it is to pick a bad mega. So you can make bad megas work for sure, but Camerupt is kind of hard to make work outside of like a Trick Room build. Regular Camerupt is horrible, undraftable, one could say. After Gen 3, it does, in fact, get up rocks and is a fairy resist. And that's about it. So, yeah. Next up, we have Trapinch. It has Arena Trap. It's draftable. Do not let this be your only ground type. If you do, I think you should probably be hung. But I think it's actually like manageable, especially with Terra. Terra Bug First Impression will net you a kill once in a while to the point where it's better than Sandslash, and that's kind of sad. Flygon. Flygon is I think it's a pretty decent budget option, actually. I think it's better than Quag, to be honest. It's, got defog and stuff, and then the offensive sets are good. It's actually still a relatively decent Scarfer, believe it or not. I actually really like Scarflagon still, and I think for, like, the 7 points I see it at in that dex, for sure, I think it's definitely fine. Can it function as a solo ground type? I think, like, barely. Like, less so than Quag, but I think it's a better Pokemon than Quagsire. It has, like, some cool additions to its toolkit, stuff like Psychic Noise and stuff First impression is nice as well. And then DD sets are like just strong enough to where it's like fine to use it in that context as well. I think Flygon's fine as a mid tier. Next up we have Whiscash. Whiscash is draftable for sure. Spikes is cool, and then it's got like DD sets that are pretty nice. And obviously Waterground again, very elite dual typing. I am a huge proponent of Watergrounds. So, like I said, these placements of these ground types is just all over the place. Sorry, Dex number enthusiasts. But yeah, I think draftable but concerning is literally Whiscash incarnate. Next up we have Claydol, draftable but concerning, spin and teleport, and that's really nice. So, yeah, spin and teleport. Thank you for your contribution to the video game, Claydol. Everybody loves you. Torterra is a very solid low mid. The Shell Smash sets can force mirror herbs and prep. Like, it's just scary enough to where you would want to bring a mirror herb just in case. A lot of the time, especially if Terra is on the table. And I think ground grass is like a horrible typing defensively, but still you're an electric immunity, so they have to consider it. This does check most of the top tier electrics pretty decently. Stuff like your Cocos, Brave Bird actually might just bounce off, unless you're like really heavily chipped. But you are weak to U-turn, which kind of sucks into the Coco matchup and stuff like Zapdos. So and the Thundies, but it's still like considerable. So I think this mon is actually, with Shell Smash added, is really solid now. You don't break grass types; they're free switching into you, but you can still force chip, especially if you have like a Zygarde you're pairing this with and stuff. We have Gastro next. I'm not gonna lie, I hate Gastrodon, but because I have Quagsire up here, I gotta put it like above Steelix. I think it's better than Mega Steelix, like worse than Donphan, because it sets the hazards like pretty effectively, and a water immunity from a ground type is like really nice. You're never gonna run Water Absorb on Quagsire, like unless you're facing like a rain team, I guess. So Gastrodon functions. I think it's like the only one that's immune to water. No, there's also Seismitoad, and we'll get to Seismitoad very soon. But and yeah, I put the better Gastrodon form up there. Fuck off. I'm definitely not a fan of Gastrodon, but it does just enough to where like Clear Smog is like good until you face a sub setup guy. But then yeah, especially Yawn too. I think Yawn is a superior Clear Smog, but that's just me. Because it got the extra hazards, then I think it definitely is a lot more draftable. But it's like it's just frail enough to where you're just so disappointed with it, especially into setup mons. It just does not check setup mons at all. So you just got to keep that in mind when you have a Gastrodon on your team. It can definitely function as a solo ground type. You just have to be very cautious of using it as a switch in. Mega Garchomp is amazing. Scale Shot is such a good tool for it, even if you're not Dice, because this thing with the speed boost is pretty good, because that's the one thing holding it back from being better than regular Chomp. And regular Chomp is obviously still better. We'll get to it in a second, but still, it's also really fat, so it can set like it can get spikes up like pretty reliably and shit. I think this mon's really good, so yeah, especially for the price points of like 15, 16 points. Especially considering you do start with a regular Garchomp. Regular Garchomp is better still, though, obviously, because you can still run like Dice and shit. The Tank Chomp sets are really good because your ability is actually useful. I don't think you're ever going to really run. I mean, it can function on sand, but I don't think, unless you have a T-Tar, I guess, that you're going to draft Garchomp as your main sand abuser. You're going to draft a Sand Rush guy, for sure. Excadrill, mostly. But yeah, I think, excuse me, like 2 in the morning right now. I think regular Garchomp's obviously elite, and I don't think it's really questionable. Hippopotas is fake, but it sets sand, so it can be used like once every 300 draft leagues. Hippowdon, it's a low mid for sure. Yeah. because it doesn't get like momentum and stuff, and I have always struggled finding move slots on a Hippowdon. It's really, really, really bulky. To a fault sometimes. Like it doesn't die, and that's good. But if you're not drafting it on a sand team, the sand is like really bad for your team most of the time. Like you don't want to be taking that extra chip. As good as it is into your opponent a lot of the time, it also can potentially goob you. And if you're running Sand Force on the Hippo, then that kind of sucks. I do think the Mon is good. I think it is like overall. Actually, I'm gonna move it up, especially because it is. I think a good sand setter as well. I think it is probably better than a couple of these guys. Um, to a degree, and it's fat, like very fat on the physical side. So I think it's great enough. It's just kind of a momentum sink, which kind of sucks. Um, Wormadam Sandy. All right, next up we have Rhyperior. Especially with Terra, I think Rhyperior is a very good mid-tier ground type. It's so strong, and if we're factoring Terra, it's like it's top of the line. Like, but even if you're not, it's like Solid Rock is good enough. It's a very solid flying resist. It's so hard to switch into Stab, Quake Edge. Rock Polish stats still function pretty decently with Solid Rock as your ability. Um, and then obviously you factor in Terra, then you get more. Then you actually get utility out of Lightning Rod and shit. It gets Terra Blast, so it functions with many types. I think very solid mid-tier option, and I'm a big fan of Rhyperior. Setup sets and defensive sets both function extremely well. So, yeah, Rhyperior, very good profile, and can definitely function as a solo ground. Next up, we have Gliscor, which is very good. Gliscor is very good. Gliscor is very good. Everybody knows how good this thing is. Obviously, gaining Roost back is, like, really good. It's extremely good at getting up spikes. Like, I think this is one of the best spike setters in the game, maybe. It's definitely up there. Obviously, it can take, like, random-ass ice beams and shit. And again, getting Roost back is just so huge for it. I know 4-move slot syndrome is a thing. You want to fit Protect on a lot of sets, but still, Roost, very good on its own. Toxic, very good. It's a really solid pivot. It can just switch in, take 2 hits, and then you turn out. It's like, damn, how the hell do you do that, dude? You just tanked 2 ice punches from I don't know, like a no attack Quagsire. Like, how did you do that? And then you turned. Or I don't think it gets Power Whip. I forget. I always mess that up if it does or not. Next up, we got Mamo. And Mamo still picks apart offense like crazy. Like, offensive drafts definitely shudder when they see a Mamo in the preview. Because, obviously it's just so strong. And it's bulky enough to where it'll take a hit and then, like, revenge and kill a key piece. And it can just, like, Ice Shard after. Or it functions really well late game with Life Orb Ice Shard in the back. It's pretty solid at getting up rocks. I still think it's a very good Pokemon, especially in a Nat Dex context. Very underpriced, very underdrafted. I know big 2025 Mamoswine, but it's still strong. It's definitely not fat enough anymore to be like a solid defensive sort of thing. Like it's Sun. Its Sun is better at being a defensive ground type. Obviously, it's still an ice, but solid ability in a solid ability. Jesus fuck. In thick fat helps a lot too. So it's got a lot of redeeming qualities, and I still think it's a very, very good mid tier option. Next up we got Dougie. Dougie is the epitome of a secondary ground type. Like, you are not gonna solo ground with a Dougie, but Dougie Arena Trap is solid enough because it can maybe knock a steel type or 2 out of the game. It's a really good speed tier. It's like, I think, the fastest ground type, if I'm not mistaken. Let me double check. Let me look at these guys. I think it is in fact the fastest ground type, not factoring booster energy. Yeah, so that's good. If you want like a 120 kind of speed tier, Dougie can definitely do that. Very, very solid Pokemon, and I think Dougie. I like Dougie. I'm actually pretty pro Dougie, believe it or not. Even in Nat Dex, it can literally just like trap anything. and take a big chunk off it. You can go 1 for 1. You can gambit after you, and it potentially. I know you have like 35 base HP, but still like a final gambit will chunk something pretty hard. And I know you're losing a mon to do that, but still, it's got its niche. Dougie with hair is draftable. I think it's more draftable as a ground than a steel, and I know that sounds stupid, but you're immune to Volt Switch, and that's like one of the key reasons to pick a ground type is so stuff like rotom forms don't volt all over you for free, and a frail ground type is still better than no ground type, so it's something. Yeah. Next up we got Drill. Drill is I think still really good, especially factoring in Terra as an option. If you're not factoring in Terra, and this is still true for the Steel type video, just in retrospect, if you're like banning Terra for whatever reason, I think Drill is an A tier, but it's very good on sand. Obviously, you factor Terra in, and it can just literally have a coverage move for free. It can break through fat flying or grass types with Terra Ice. You can get super strong Sand Forest, Scarf, fucking Earthquakes with Terra Ground. That sounds pretty hard to switch into. It's checkable, but you kind of have to centralize around it in prep. I feel like a lot of the time. You can tack on like a weather move or something, but still, it's like very solid. So, I think it's an S tier with Terra involved. Next up, we got Toad. I don't know if this is controversial to say, but Toad is like fucked up. I think it's good. It's got flexibility in like offensive solo rain sets, and if you factor in Terra with that, it's like super difficult to pivot it around. I think having the water immunity as well on your ground type better than Gastrodon because you get the free healing. Gastrodon does get recover, but Toad also just hits harder and is much fatter on both sides. I don't know if it's fatter on the special side, but it's definitely fatter on the physical side, and it's probably similar special bulk. I'm not going to look at it, but I'm not pro Gastrodon, so this is a fact check by Toad Gang. Pert is better because it got Knock this gen, but you still have like Knock. You still have stuff like good coverage, ground and water. Again, very elite typing, and its water immunity makes it very comparable to Swampert. If it got Flip Turn, it would be incredible. But I still think it solidly functions pretty well as a mid-tier ground type. Next up, we have Crook, and this is as close as I feel like Swampert is to getting dethroned, but I actually think it is an A tier. I think it is like borderline a mid tier, but Crook just has a lot of set variety. It literally can go. I think it's actually better than Nidoqueen. I'm not gonna lie. It can go the offensive or defensive route very effectively, especially with access to Scale Shot. It has 5 sets that I can name off the top of my head: AV, Defensive, Intimidate, Scarf Moxie, Banded, and Bulk Up. And then like Loaded Dice, Scale Shot. Like, it has so much variety in its sets, despite all of the moves, potentially looking the same on it. And it flexes super well. And, solo grounds better than anything down in B. And almost as effectively as anything up in A. So, yeah, very good ground type. I think very solid. Even with creep factored in. Galarian Stunfisk is like pickable. High max. Fuck you. Next up, we have regular Stunfisk, which I think is still a low mid. Like to the point where I don't know. It's very hard to place this. I'm gonna put it above Gligar. I'm gonna put it below Gligar. I'm gonna put Gligar above Piloswine. Because it has like Yawn and Toxic. It has tools to prevent it from being too passive, but it's still like kind of frail. Don't tell him I said that, but he's got like Gastro bulk, kind of. I think it might actually be a little bulkier, but Gastro has like recover and like extra hazards, so It's a shame it wasn't in Gen 9 because they would have given it spikes and T-spikes. Uh, next up we have Golurk, which it has its like, I think it's better than like most of these guys. I'm gonna put it above Steelix. I think as a low mid, offensively, it's like really solid, and it's a spin blocker, which is pretty rare to see in grounds. Obviously, it's a rocker that blocks spin, which is like a really decent niche. It's very strong. Obviously, it has like 130 attack, and like no guard, dynamic punch, and stab geist. It's like a really good dual stab that's hard to switch into, and it's definitely a low mid that people have to consider in the builder. You know, rock polish sets are pretty strong if you don't bring it every week. So I think it functions super well as a low tier ground. I don't think it's a great solo ground, but it's definitely like a choice to make. You know, you can if you want. Next up we have Lando T, very close to GOAT status, but not quite. Lando T just so epitome. Like, I don't even know how to describe it anymore. Like, it just is the same Pokemon it's been for the past fucking 13 years. I think it came out in 2012, but don't quote me on that. With boots, like knock, you know, you get its toxic back in that deck, so it's even better. Like, oh, it doesn't have knock and pal deck, so yeah, it gets knock and toxic back is what I meant to say. It's incredible. I don't really need to go into much detail on it. It just does everything. Oh, it gets defog back too, so that's also really nice. Next up, we have the Landorus Incarnate, which, with sheer force, getting rock polish back is huge for it. It's incredibly. This is better than Chomp. It's incredibly hard to find counterplay to it. Besides offensively checking it, very centralizing Pokemon in the builder. Rock polish is just such an amazing add for it. Losing rock polish definitely made the Mon like kind of fall pretty far down in PAL decks. Like from a 19, 20 point Pokemon to like a 14, 13 point option. I think it's like 13 points in DPL if I'm not mistaken. Kind of a crime. But yeah, incredible Pokemon in that decks, I think. Diggersby, factoring in Terra as an option is a pretty good mid tier. If there's no Terra involved, it's probably below like Donphan, but it's a very good offensive ground, especially with Terra. It has, you know, choice band setup and scarf sets, and it has spikes access. It's like Diggersby is Diggersby is Diggersby is Diggersby. So very, very good offensive ground type, especially factoring in Terra. Next up we have Zy50. I mean Zy10, excuse me. It's a low mid for sure. It's like the speed tier is good. It's a good offensive choice, but it's like I really wouldn't pick this thing unless it's like 7 points or less at this point, because it's just so weak. Like, I shook in my boots prepping for it in Usum, and then when it comes time, I never see it picked in that Dex Gen 9 anymore. Probably because like 1,000 Arrows is a really good move, but it's just like 100 attack. And this Mon is so frail, it dies to everything that's like at least 14 points. In fact, I think like most Pokemon that are at least 9 points in the game now can just OHKO this Pokemon. And I don't think that that's very far off of an exaggeration. So yeah, next up we have Zygarde. And Zygarde, I think Zygarde still got game, to be honest with you. This thing is an elite DD sweeper, and Coil is still really cool. We gotta remember how fat this thing is. And policy sets are just insanely good. And then you have dice scale shot sets, which I don't think I've ever seen on this. But you know, guys, it does it, guys. And if you allow Terra on it, bless your heart. This Mon becomes uncheckable at that point, but I'm considering it as a Terra banned set Pokemon. I think this Mon is still really good. I don't understand why it doesn't get picked more. Mudsdale is a very good mid tier. I think very underrated. To be completely honest, honestly, I would almost put it ahead of Donphan, but I won't go that far. Stamina is just really good, and its attack stat is super high. Like, to me, it's kind of like if Gigalith didn't set sand and had a better typing. yeah, the stat spread is really good. You can run AV, you can run rocks. I know it's a momentum sink, but it is way less passive than something like Donphan is. Um, body press sets are super hard to check, and base 125 choice band. Good luck switching into it. So yeah, Mudsdale's very good, believe it or not. Next up, we got Golem. Golem is fake. I think dog meat. I think feed it to the Gorons. This mon is fucking horrid. It doesn't do anything. It's like, does it even set rocks? It has sturdy, I guess. So, I don't know why Hippopotas is up here. Marowak is probably the best of these mons for sure. Yeah, it gets up rocks and explodes. That's it. Sandaconda is bad, but it's definitely a relatively okay low mid. I think I actually do think you can solo with a Sandaconda for sure, but I wouldn't put it like above the mons in the tiers. You know what I mean? So maybe the can function solo. The secondary thing wasn't exactly like the best sort of criteria, but yeah, it has like tools. It's a decent rocker. It has decent bulk, coil, and dice sets are definitely very hard to very hard are definitely something to consider with Terra involved. And Glare is obviously just a broken ass move that is stupid and should have never been buffed. So, yeah, pretty straightforward Pokemon. It's the epitome of a low tier ground. Next up, we have Palisand, which, in my opinion, is better than Golurk. It's a better spin blocker. It's a better rocker. It's a better defensive ground type. It recovers, and the defensive typing is pretty solid. Definitely more passive, but getting Toxic back is definitely huge for it. So, I think it's very decent and kind of underrated. And then up next we have Ursaluna, which is it definitely has fallen off in the gen for sure. I still think it's like an A tier ground type. Oh, you know what Pokemon isn't on here is Blood Moon. So I will put Blood Moon on after this. I'll pause and just put this in paint and just import it. But yeah, Ursaluna, very good in Trick Room, very hard to switch into. Terra involved, and if you get like a solid sort of like structure around it, it's definitely something that benefits. It's like Hoopa Unbound, but good. Because like if you bring this in, you turn a bunch, have a bunch of pivots. Stuff like a Trailblaze set is like really hard to deal with. Like a Trailblaze, just it doesn't even need a setup move at that point. Or if you have Trick Room up and you have an SD, name something that doesn't die to Facade or / Headlong Rush. Like everything just explodes, unless your name is like Skarmory or Corviknight. So and Celesteela, I think probably, but then you just Thunder Punch them and they're all just like fucking toast. So very good. I think it's a very good Pokemon still. It's definitely centralizing, at the very least. And then we have Runerigus, which is pretty bad, but has its place. It's definitely a spin blocker of sorts. It's pretty fat, and it can lay down T-spikes, which is, I guess, like pretty good. It's a better rocker than like Golurk is, but it's worse at like everything else. So it does a job for sure. He tries his best. Then we have Toedscruel, which is horrible. Like horrible. It's a spinner, but everything that it does goes last. Spore is such a nice move, and then this thing doesn't touch like other grass types. Like Sludge Bomb is bouncing off because it's got Tentacruel's fucking stats, but also B, it goes last. It just goes last. So if you're in against like a Kyurem, yeah, you outspeed it, but Mycelium Might is the worst ability ever created and should burn in hell. Although it's really good at like, against Gholdengo and like Sableye and stuff like that. But that's like so niche. Toxic is kind of nice. Like if you're fighting Stall, Toxic is kind of free, but like who drafts Stall anyway? You know what I mean? All right, we are entering the final countdown here. We have Clodsire. I am not a Clodsire fan, but I will acknowledge the fact that definitely it is a relatively good ground type, I'll put it above Donphan because Donphan is ass. It gets all 3 hazards, soaks up T-spikes, does everything that you would like a mid-tier ground type to do, better than its little gay Johto cousin, and it soaks up T-spikes at the same time. Pretty good defensive typing, and yeah, just functions extremely well. No notes. For my money, the GOAT of ground types is definitely not a surprise to anybody. It is Great Tusk, far and away, just incredible. Great offensive typing, like potentially the best offensive typing in the game. Either that or Ground Fairy, and there's no Ground Fairy, so there you go. And it's the best spinner in the game, not even close. There's no competition except from Treads and who else? I don't know. I don't really need to. I need to say less about Tusk than I need to say about Lando. It has amazing coverage. Knock is awesome. It's a really good rocker. It does everything that a ground type does extremely well. The only knock against it is the Spadef is really bad, but if you invest in it, it becomes like a reverse Blissey almost. You would be shocked and appalled by what that mon can do. Except we have Shocks. For Shocks, it's bad unless Terra is on the table. And if Terra is on the table, it is, well, even without Terra on the table, I think it's a very, it's definitely upper mid tier. It's better than a Toad. It's better than a Mamo. It's better than a Diggersby. But with Terra on the table, it almost goes above Pert in terms of mid tier value because this mon is a very solid user of Terra. Gaining a tertiary, stab is just so good. Its coverage is so abysmal that just getting any sort of coverage is nice. So yeah, Shocks is solid. It lays down hazards pretty well. Being able to outrun the base 100s is good. The main knock against it is that most ground types on this list can switch into it and check it pretty well if Terra is not involved. Pert can, Flygon can, Landos, both Landos, all the flying ones can. Everything up here definitely can, unless you can run a Terra Ice, a Terra Grass, or a Terra Water, or a Terra Fairy. So definitely something to consider. Treads is a much better ground type than it is a steel type. Treads is amazing at blocking Volt Switch, getting momentum, getting the spin off that it needs to. It's great at laying down rocks. I actually do think it's better than Chomp. Don't tell anybody I said that. Even in Nat decks, I think it's better than Chomp for sure. It just does the support role really well. It's so elite at it. Plus factoring in the offensive sets, it still has a really good dual stab and great coverage. To the point where you can run a booster attack spin set and just win a game. Treads will either come in and do its utility job extremely well, or it will get 3 kills in the end game and win a match just by existing and having the good coverage that it does. I think Treads is amazing as a ground type. Very, very, very good. And I like drafting a second steel with it more than I like drafting a second ground, I think. Just kind of thinking about it. And then finally we got Lou. Lou has matchups where it just kind of gets fried. The fact that there's mons that can kind of hard counter it more so than there are mons above it. The only real sort of competition is the Genies, but you got Crunch on. I'm sorry, the Lake Trio for him, but you have Crunch now. Fat Fairies are kind of hard for Chomp, but if you're an SD set, you can kind of just set up in front of them. Lou, on the other hand, it has mons that kind of hard stop it, but they're they're fewer for sure. Gliscor is so free into Ting Lu that it actually just kind of puts it below it, I think. But Ting Lu lives ludicrous fucking hits. I don't think this mon is real, just based on the calcs that I've run myself in picking this thing. This mon is incredible. And very solidly OU and very solidly a 17-point Pokemon for a reason. At least to me. Very solidly 17 points. And in Nat Dex functions extremely well. And it lays down spikes better than anything besides Gliscor, I think. So let us I'll meet you all in paint to set this up for Ursaluna Blood Moons. Let me just load that up real quick. So Ursaluna Blood Moon has been added. I think it is an elite very hard to prep around a Pokemon that Terra should be banned on. And yeah, I think it's pretty straightforward. It's the special version of its brother. Ursaluna has, I think, more viability in matchups, but I think Ursaluna Blood Moon is better in prep. You're forcing like random protects. You're forcing, more Spadef. I think just by having this on your team. If you pair it with a really good physical breaker, I think it's much more centralizing than regular Ursaluna is, because with regular Ursaluna, everything is just dying. Um, so, yeah. Whereas it's just kind of workable enough, and you're just strong enough to where you're kind of forcing like uncomfortable spreads. So yeah, going over all of the Pokemon here. First of all, for the Goat, Great Tusk, very good roll compression, very solid rocker, very solid spinner, impossible to switch into coverage. Bulk upsets are great, and Booster Energy is just like an insane prospect on some of these Mons. Like Paradox Mons are just just elite in general, most of them. Lando T. Lando T is Lando T is Lando T is Lando T. Very good offensive and defensive sets. One of the best Scarfers in the game. Very good coverage. Not really much to say. Well, not really good coverage. Just like solid enough coverage to be threatening, i.e. Quake Edge, and potentially Terra Blast. Treads, I think, functions way better as a ground than a steel. It blocks Volt Switches more effectively. Its ground typing gives it much better positioning than its steel typing usually does. Although the typing, as a dual type is very good, so it functions extremely well in both aspects. I think utility-wise, it's very, very elite, and then offensive sets kind of can just win games in the end game on their own. Chomp has a great set variety. The tank Chomp with just dual hazards and like a phasing move and helmet, forcing a lot of chip progress. Offensive sets are really centralizing, and it's still a really good Scarfer. And has like some cool additions to its special toolkit as well, i.e. Power Gem. So it gets a lot of cool tools that make it still an elite Pokemon. Sheardo Eye has very good. Sheer Force Lando Eye is a lot better in prep with Rock Polish access, and it forces very uncomfortable positioning. So I think it's an elite breaker, which puts it so high up on the list. Very, very good at that role. Gliscor, amazing hazard stack. Getting Roost back makes Gliscor all that much more annoying to deal with, albeit harder as well. On that same note, to have a really good set of 4 moves every week. That being said, it's still amazing at what it does, which is set hazards, poison everything, and stall out games. And block status and knockoff. Tinglu, just ridiculous calcs with this thing. Amazing hazard stack Pokemon, and Ruination is such a great tool for it. Very self-explanatory, very elite defensive piece. It just has like hard wall like kind of matchups. Stuff like Regen can kind of pivot around it. Gliscor definitely is one of the biggest hard stops in the game to Tinglu. So it's kind of a momentum sink, but it is so fat to where, an offensive set can function pretty well. So it has just enough variety and is an elite defensive piece. So that's why it is so high up. Garchomp, Mega, set variety. Same story with Baby Chomp, except the higher attack stat. Scale Shot is a great tool, although obviously the lack of loaded dice, makes it a lot worse in that aspect. Still a very good tool, though, for Mega Chomp. Zygarde, I still think, is a very elite setup sweeper threat. I know it's like weak, but it still has stuff like E-Speed, Coil, and this is also not factoring in Terra. If you allow Terra on a Zygarde, you should not be allowed to run a league or walk the streets without having to answer a few questions. But yeah, I still think it's a good setup sweeper, and Glare is just such a good tool that it has some good defensive variety as well. Drill functions great on sand. I think it's an elite weather abuser and breaker, and still pretty good as a spinner, especially factoring in Terra completely keeps it in S tier. I think Terra was a great boon for it, gives it an additional coverage move into stuff like steel flying types or fat grass types. So I think it is just enough to keep it in Nat decks. Nidoking, I think, very good as a breaker and can kind of cosplay as a Nidoqueen with some great with some great EVing, and especially Fizdef investment, and it functions extremely well into the top tier electric types. Pert Mega, purely great on Rain. Functions okay outside of it, but I've never seen it drafted outside of Rain. So, yeah, or at least it's been like fucking 10 years probably, or 9 years or whatever. Whenever my first season was, Crook. Great set variety leads to a great high placement. Defensive and offensive sets still does great things and has good qualities and is a great pursuit trapper. Blood Moon Ursaluna, very centralizing in prep, very good offensive utility. Nidoqueen still kind of does the same thing it does, like relatively effectively. Power Creep has definitely been kind of hard for its offensive side, but the defensive side is still pretty good to the point where it can still kind of set hazards, and it has good enough coverage. So I think it still kind of justifies an A placement. And then regular Ursaluna is an elite breaker, but still Power Creep and Chip and stuff like Helmet. It kills a lot of things, but it doesn't kill everything. It's still very, very hard to check defensively, which puts it very high up on the list, in my opinion. B tier, these budgets. Swampert, best mid tier. I think by far. Terra on Shocks makes it like kind of a contentious one, but I still think, Swampert has that very rare quality of being a pivot rocker. And I think a pivot rocker is just such a nice tool for so many teams that Swampert is and it's really effective at it. It's not like something like an Empoleon that it's a pivot rocker, but it's pressured more so because of its typing. Swampert is a lot less pressured. It's kind of hard to explain, but I think the tools Swampert has make it a very good pivot rocker and a very solid mid-tier option that is the epitome of a Pokemon that can function solo. Terra Shocks, very good. Otherwise, I think it still justifies the placement, even if you're like in a Terra Ban league. I think Shocks is good enough to where, it gets walled out by so many of the grounds on this list, but it's still very effective at like laying down hazards and pivoting around, and it's a good screen setter. Toad, the water immunity definitely hard carries it, and it's just the set variety. And I think with Terra, it's actually a pretty good solo rain setter. Those sets are like pretty effective. I'm still a big Toad fan. 2 very useful immunities, only 1 weakness, and if you have Terra on it, then, multi-purpose. Next, Mamo. Mamo still really good into offense, very great matchup into that, and some good set variety, good enough. Scarf, Life Orb, Choice Band, Trailblaze is a nice tool. It's just good. Diggersby is only this high if Terra is factored in. Same with Rhyperior. Both are pretty good breakers. Rhyperior obviously has more defensive utility, but both are definitely placed pretty highly due to Terra viability. Clodsire lays down hazards effectively. Unaware is really nice. It can be a decent water immunity if you need one in a pinch. Has Toxic that can't miss. Pretty good Pokemon. I'm not a big fan of using it, but I can acknowledge that it is a solid tool for a lot of teams. Donphan is a Pokemon that I do not respect as much. It's a good spinner. The priority's nice, but like I said, 2-turn Tony. Mudsdale, I put above a lot of the other mid tiers that people consider better. Usually, I think conventionally, because a Gastrodon or a Torterra, because it's just solid. Like it's like to me when I think of like mid tier ground type, I think Swampert, I think Seismitoad, and I think Mudsdale and Donphan. Because Mudsdale, very strong, very hard to switch into. Offensive sets are really good. Stamina is such a nice tool, and it just lays down rocks really well. And it phases. It has just a lot of really good qualities one can garner from a ground type. And, bulky enough on both sides. I think it's a very solid Pokemon. Gastrodon tries really hard to be defensive, but doesn't do it very well. It's too frail on the physical side and struggles to take a lot of hits that you would want it to, but it does lay down hazards fairly well, which gives it a pretty high placement, and a water immunity is always nice. Mega Steelix is good on both sides, and the dual typing is nice. Pretty straightforward. Hippo, good at setting sand. Pretty good defensive profile. And yeah, Flygon just barely can function solo, and its sets are still good enough even with creep involved. Quagsire, Unaware, is just really good. It's good on offensive teams with that kind of structure, and is a pretty decent hazard stacker, especially with Unaware involved. Dougie, purely trapper, purely offense, good speed tier. Zai 10, very, very much hit hard by power creep, but still just decent enough. 1,000 Arrows is such a good move that I think high of low mid is good. Torterra forces prep and has a pretty good defensive niche still. Palossand, pretty decent defensive budget option. Golurk, very hard to switch into. Very good dual stab. No guard is just kind of solid on it. Steelix is good. Just the typing is good, and it's a decent physical tank. Piloswine's still pretty good against offense, and its dual stab is pretty hard to switch into. Sandaconda, Glare is nice and kind of hard carries it a little bit in the placement, but it still has enough variety with like loaded dice sets and stuff. Gligar, very good at setting hazards and ground immunity, stuff like that. Decent low tier pivot rocker. There you go. Runerigus, pretty close to undraftable, but it's a spin blocker. It's it can also lay T-spikes down, and split is nice, and it's pretty good at spreading wisps and status. Stunfisk is still Stunfisk. Like, it's a fine low tier ground type. It's good for like 3 or 4 points. It can be a solo ground type, but it's just like, why would you let it be a solo ground type? Mega Camerupt is a good breaker, functions almost exclusively on Trick Room, but I still think pretty draftable. Toedscruel is really bad. The utility you get from its speed gets canceled out by Mycelium Might, forcing it to go second with status moves. Rhydon may be placed a little too low. I think you can do a lot of EV variety with it, but that being said, two quad weaknesses plus the fact that it is very susceptible to knockoff kind of knocks it pretty low. Whiscash gets hazards, and Water Ground is a good typing. Claydol, Rocks plus Port plus Spin is good enough to make it, kind of draftable, I guess. Trapinch can first impression stuff like Hoopa and Bound. Cool. Sandslash is like a spinner that can spin and lays spikes and is terrible. Stunfisk I put in draftable because of Sir Please Stop. And then Alolan Dugtrio blocks Volt Switch. And then those 5 down there are shit. So yeah, thank you for watching, and we will next time, I believe, be doing fairies. It's debatable between fairies and poisons. I will have to just pick which one I like better. So, see you all then. Thanks for watching.